Hey everybody, Pastor Sullivan here at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kerrville, Texas. Welcome back to another episode of ATP, Ask the Pastor. Today somebody writes in, Dear Pastor, I know that Valentine's was originally a church holiday, but has he always been associated with love and romance? I find it hard to believe that he wrote a letter to someone that's supposed to be the first Valentine card. I also saw a lot of posts on social media this year that said that when marriage was outlawed by the Roman emperor, he married people in secret so that they didn't serve in the military. Did he really do these things? And if so, what do we learn from his example? What made Valentine's Day a Christian holiday originally? Great questions. So, Valentine, patron saint of lovers, epileptics, and in some countries, beekeepers. But of those three, he's most commonly known as for his association with love and romance. Now, ironically, Valentine is one of those saints that everyone knows, but about whom we know virtually nothing. In fact, we know so little about Valentine that we don't even know if there was only one Saint Valentine. Valentinus was a ridiculously common name in the late antique Roman Empire. He was either a priest in Rome or the bishop of the central Italian city called Terni, or a layman in North Africa, all of whom we mentions that they were martyred. The historical evidence that we have, however, limits us to the Italian Valentines, and even those may be the same person. The earliest evidence that we have of Valentine is information about the Basilica of St. Valentine, which is about a mile outside the gate from Rome on the Via Flaminia, a road from Rome that goes north to Arminium on the north in the north on the Adriatic Sea. The chronology of 354 records that Pope Julius I built St. Valentine's Church, and archaeological evidence has discovered a mid-4th century basilica 1 mile outside the gate on the Flaminian Way. And it also appears to have been built around a 4th century grave. The first written account that we have for Valentine is in the Martyrology of Jerome. Now, it's falsely attributed to Jerome. Parts of it date from 430 to 450 AD, but it was added to over the centuries. And as the manuscript as we have it today dates to around 600. And its entry for February 14th states at Terni, at the 64th mile of the Via Flaminia, the death of St. Valentine. So all this shows us is that there was a Christian by the name of Valentine who was martyred in the 3rd century, was commemorated on February 14th, and that Julius I built a basilica in his honor. Now, until recently, the only legend I had ever heard about Valentine was that after being arrested for the faith, he converted his jailer's daughter of blindness, he converted his jailer and his family by healing his jailer's daughter's blindness. There we go. And before his martyrdom, he allegedly left a letter for this young lady signed, Your Valentine. However, this year I too, through the glories of social media and the interwebs, was introduced to the legend that Valentine was beheaded for performing clandestine marriages. The story, as I read it on several blogs and heard a podcast, was that the Emperor Claudius II Gothicus outlawed marriage so that he could conscript more men into military service for his campaign against the Goths in the Balkans. In response to this, Valentine allegedly married Christians in secret so that the men could dodge the draft. When he was discovered, Claudius II had him martyred. Now, both of these legends about Valentine have one thing in common, and that is there is no historical evidence for either. The legend about the letter is clearly reading the modern practice of giving Valentines back into history. The legend about Valentine helping Christians dodge the draft during Claudius's reign is just as far-fetched for several reasons. First, we have no record whatsoever that Claudius issued an edict forbidding marriage to soldiers or to anyone. Now, there was a 200-year period when it was illegal for Roman soldiers to be married, but that period began with Caesar Augustus, the emperor at the time of Jesus' birth, and it ended during the reign of Septimius Severus. He reigned from 193 to 211, and we have no record of Claudius II doing such a thing. Nor do we have any evidence of any sort of state-sponsored persecution during the reign of Claudius II. He reigned from 268 to 270 AD. The last state-sponsored persecution before Claudius's reign ended in 260, so 8 years before he ascended to the purple. That was the persecution of Valerian. During that persecution, Christian property was confiscated, Christians were prohibited from assembling, and clergy were executed. And so that persecution saw the martyrdoms of prominent men like Cyprian of Carthage, Sixtus II of Rome, and his deacon St. Lawrence. Now in 260, when Valerian's son, Gallienus, became emperor, he issued an edict which recognized the government of the church and restored the church's property. So Gallienus issued a practical toleration of Christians, not a full-on toleration. It was not a repeal of the common law that made Christianity illicit still. Now Claudius then succeeded Gallienus as emperor in September of 268 after Gallienus was murdered, something that Claudius may or may not have had something to do with. And Claudius's reign was very brief. It was a year and a half, upwards of 2 years. And during that entire time, he was devoted to his military campaign, defeating the Goths, which is how he got the epithet Gothicus. In fact, most historians doubt whether he even stepped foot in Rome while he was emperor. Nor is there any record that he revoked his predecessor's edict of toleration for the Christians. In fact, that 40-year period between 260 and 303, the beginning of the Diocletian persecution, the final and greatest persecution of the church, that period, church historians often refer to it as the Long Peace. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't localized persecutions, sporadic persecutions here or there, flashes in the pan. But if those happened, they were the exception, not the rule during this period. Now, the medieval legend of St. Valentine that's recorded in the martyrdom of Valentinus is probably a lot closer to reality than modern legends. In this story, Valentinus, the bishop of Terni, he heals the son of an orator, Crato, in Rome. Crato, his entire household, along with 3 of his students, convert because of this. And through them, the urban prefect's son is converted, who proclaims his faith publicly, which leads to Valentinus' arrest. After he's beaten with clubs, then he's compelled to sacrifice to the emperor, When he refuses to sacrifice to the emperor, then he's jailed and later beheaded. Those 3 students of Crato, whom he had converted, take his body, bury him in Terni. And eventually they're arrested and beheaded as well, and they're buried close to Valentinus in Terni by Crato's son. Now, although this legend is late in history, it fits really well with the political situation for Christians in the 3rd century Rome. Emperor Trajan's rescript of 113 and Hadrian's in 121 AD, they had established the procedure for dealing with Christians. And it was basically that Christianity is an illicit religion. Christians are not to be sought out, but if someone accuses them before the tribunal of being a Christian, then they are brought before the tribunal, given an opportunity to deny the allegation, and demonstrate it, prove it, by burning incense to the pagan gods, specifically the emperor. If they confessed Christ, however, and refused to sacrifice, then they were punished, most oftentimes with death. That situation is the situation that presents itself in the medieval martyr of Valentinus. So if the stories about Valentine and marriage, and clandestine marriage and all that aren't true, then how did St. Valentine come to be associated with love and romance? Well, it probably was through the poetry of Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century in England. In his poem, Parliament of Fowls, Chaucer chose St. Valentine's Day to be the day on which birds pair off for mating. Now this 14th century seems to be the beginning of Valentine's transformation into a quasi-Cupid and patron of lovers and romance. Before the late 1300s, there were no such associations of which we are aware. Now, as for what Valentine teaches us by his example, as a martyr, he teaches us to confess Christ before men no matter the cost, and to endure persecution and be faithful to death for Christ's sake if martyrdom is the death to which he calls us. Valentine, like all martyrs, are models of perseverance, not just in the midst of persecution, but perseverance in the midst of temptations as well. So the example of the martyrs, all of them, including Valentine, about whom we know actually very little, encourages Christians to persevere in our confession of Christ against persecutors and against temptations, no matter the consequences. This version of Valentine, rather than some quasi-Cupid performing clandestine marriages, that is the real Valentine, and that is the real legacy and example that he leaves for the faithful. Hope that helps. We'll see you next time for another episode of ATP.